So, why do people commit crimes? I mean, really, why do they break the rules? It's this huge, fundamental question that pretty much drives the entire field of criminology. And let me tell you, the answers we've come up with over the years, they're all over the place, and a lot of them are pretty controversial. I mean, people have been wrestling with this for centuries. Is it a simple choice? Someone just calculates the risk and goes for it? Or is it something deeper? Maybe it's wired into our biology. Or is it all about the world we live in, a product of our society? Each one of these ideas is like a different lens for looking at crime. So let's dive in and start with the one that for most of us probably feels the most obvious. Okay, so let's kick things off with what's probably the oldest idea out there, the belief that crime is a choice, that criminals are just rational people who decide to break the law. This view puts the cause of crime squarely inside a person's head. Now, before the Enlightenment, things were, well, they were pretty wild. Justice was often brutal, totally unpredictable. Get this, in 16th century England, there were over 200 different crimes that could get you the death penalty. But then, thinkers like Cesar Beccaria came along and said, whoa, hold on, this is crazy. They argued for a totally new way of thinking. They said the justice system shouldn't be about revenge, it should be about reason. And just like that, the goals shifted from just being cruel to actually deterring crime in a rational way. Making the punishment fit the crime. And this new way of thinking is what we now call rational choice theory. The core idea is actually super simple. It says people aren't possessed or inherently evil. They're more like calculators. They look at a situation, weigh the potential pros against the cons, the reward versus the risk of getting caught, and then they make a call. Plain and simple, in this view, crime is a choice. So, if people are just calculators, how do you stop them from committing a crime? Well, you rig the math. You make the cost higher than the benefit. This leads to what's known as a tariff system for justice. Basically, a fixed punishment is set for each crime, and it's designed to be just bad enough to make you think, nah, not worth it. A speeding ticket is the perfect example, right? It doesn't matter who you are, if you get caught, you pay the fine. The cost is fixed, and it's meant to make you think twice before you floor. And believe me, this way of thinking has had huge real-world consequences. Maybe the most famous example is the 3 strikes law. The idea is to impose a super long, mandatory sentence if you get convicted of a 3rd felony. The logic here is pure rational choice. Just make the cost of being a repeat offender so incredibly high that no one would rationally choose it. And it caught on. By 2007, 26 states had adopted some form of this law. Okay, but what if this is all wrong? What if crime isn't a choice at all? What if some people are pushed to break the law by things completely beyond their control, things rooted deep inside their own biology or psychology? This is where we enter the world of something called positivism. And early on, this scientific approach to crime was, well, it was pretty literal. You had researchers armed with calipers and charts literally measuring people's skulls, looking for the born criminal. They really believed they could spot a criminal just by their physical features, thinking that some people were just a kind of biological throwback to a more primitive human. And this is where things take a really dark turn, because that idea of a born criminal directly fueled the eugenics movement. The belief that you could inherit bad traits led to absolutely horrific policies, like the forced sterilization of over 60,000 people right here in the United States. It's a terrifying reminder that how we choose to explain crime has real, profound, and sometimes devastating consequences. Now, of course, modern biological theories are way more sophisticated. We've moved on from measuring skulls. Now scientists are looking at things like genetics, brain chemistry, and abnormalities in the brain. The tragic case of Charles Whitman is a really powerful example. Back in 1966, he went to the top of a university tower and killed 16 people. When they did an autopsy, they found he had a large brain tumor pressing on parts of the brain that are known to regulate our impulses. In a note he left behind, he actually wrote about these overwhelming, violent impulses and even asked for an autopsy to see if something was physically wrong with him. Around the same time, you had psychological theories looking inward, too, at the mind, not just the brain. For someone like Sigmund Freud, crime was all about a battle raging inside our own heads. He pictured our personality as this 3-way tug of war. You've got the id, which is just pure primal desire. I want it and I want it now. Then you've got the superego, which is your conscience, the little voice saying, nope, that's wrong. And caught in the middle is the ego, the referee, trying to make sense of it all. Freud believes that if that referee, the ego, is weak, or if the id is just way too powerful, well, that's when you might see criminal behavior. All right, so up to this point, we've been looking for the cause of crime inside a person, either in their rational thoughts or their biology. But what if we've been looking in the completely wrong place? What if crime isn't something you're born with, or something you choose in a vacuum, but something you learn from the world around you? This is where social learning theory comes in. And its main idea is honestly kind of revolutionary. It says that criminal behavior isn't some deep-seated flaw or something you're born with. It's just learned. The same way we learn to talk or cook or play a sport, we pick it up from the people around us, our family, our friends, our neighborhood. A criminologist named Edwin Sutherland had a fancy name for this, differential association. It sounds complicated, but the idea is pretty powerful. He said we're all constantly soaking up definitions, attitudes and values from our environment. And if you just happen to be exposed to more messages that say breaking the law is okay than messages that say follow the rules, then you're more likely to tip over into criminal behavior. It's like a social tipping point. And this whole idea was famously put to the test by a group of sociologists at the Chicago School. See, back in the early 20th century, Chicago was just exploding, growing like crazy. It was the perfect natural laboratory to study this stuff. And when they started mapping out where crime was happening, they found it wasn't random at all. It was clustered in these specific neighborhoods they called zones of transition, areas with a lot of poverty and people moving in and out all the time. But here's the kicker. The crime rates stayed high in those places even when completely different groups of people moved in. The mind-blowing conclusion? It wasn't about the people. It was about the place. And that discovery leads us to our final and maybe biggest perspective. If a single neighborhood can basically create crime, what if the problem is bigger? What if the entire structure of our society is the issue? What if society itself is the real criminal? A sociologist named Robert Merton came up with a really powerful theory for this called stream theory. And here's how it goes. He argued that American society, in particular, sets a kind of trap. Step one, it bombards all of us with one single universal goal, the American dream. Make a lot of money, be successful, but, and this is the key, step two, it does not give everyone the same access to the legitimate ways to get there, like good schools and good jobs. This creates a massive conflict, a strain. So for some people who find their path blocked, crime stops being this evil thing and starts to look like a logical, even rational way to get the very thing society told them they should want. This focus on the structure of society gets even sharper with something called conflict theory. These theorists argue that the word crime isn't neutral at all. They say the law is basically a tool that powerful people use to protect their own interests. Think about it. We focus all our fear, all our media, all our policing on street crime. Robbery, burglary, the crimes of the powerless. But what about sweet crime? The insider trading, the corporate pollution, the massive tax evasion committed by the powerful. Conflict theorists point out that this stuff often causes way more harm to society, but it gets a slap on the wrist, if anything, precisely because the people doing it are the ones who get to help define what crime really means in the first place. Wow. Okay, so we've taken quite a journey, right? We started inside the individual mind, then we looked at biology, then we zoomed out to our neighborhoods, and finally to the very structure of society. So after all that, what's the answer? Why do people break the rules? Well, the truth is, there's no single easy answer. A complex human behavior like crime just doesn't work that way. The best way to think about it is like light passing through a prism. You have this one act of crime, but when you look at it through all these different theories, it refracts into this whole spectrum of explanations, everything from a simple individual choice all the way to a massive societal failure. And look, this isn't just some abstract academic debate. The stakes are incredibly high, because each theory we've talked about points to a completely different solution. If you believe crime is a rational choice, the answer is to punish. If you think it's a biological or psychological issue, then the answer is to treat. And if you believe it's caused by social inequality, well, then we have to reform society itself. So, the final question. That's for you. Which lens makes the most sense to you? And what does your answer say about the kind of justice system we should be trying to build?